Hi, I'm Jessica Alderson. I'm the CEO and co-founder of SoSynced, which is a dating app that matches compatible personality types. So it's based on the 16 personalities framework, which I'm sure some of you will know already. So it's the kind of INTJ, ENFP personality type model. And yeah, today I'm going to talk about growing your app downloads with PR. So I wanted to first start with a bit of context about SoSynced and the stage that we're at, because I think that's definitely very helpful when talking about PR. So I set up the company during COVID with my sister. At first, we kind of launched it. We had full-time jobs. We had basically no budget. We were kind of using our salaries to fund even the server costs, no marketing budget. But we were very lucky. We've had challenges in different ways, but we launched and people just started finding us, which is kind of like a dream in a way. And that enabled us to raise money. So we raised our first funding round in March 2021, and that enabled us to start working on SoSynced full time and to start building a team and to kind of become a real company. So yeah, that's the kind of background, and that ties into what I'm about to talk about. So we had an advisor very early on who was very, very good. She grew a dating app to 1 million users in 9 months, which is actually faster than Bumble with a lot smaller budget. And yeah, she basically advised us around our marketing and PR strategy, user acquisition strategy. And I'm very analytical. I come from a finance chemistry background, and I like to see, this kind of very clear return on money being spent. So I was challenging her around the kind of benefits and return on investment of PR. And she said, do you want to be one of those tacky dating apps that you always see on Instagram ads, but no one actually knows? And I'm sure some of people in this room will know exactly what I'm talking about. You kind of see those dating apps, they don't really have a brand, they haven't really built trust, and they kind of somehow exist, but it's not the same as Tinder, Bumble, or Hinge, for example. So that quote really stuck with me. So yeah, what do we know about press? So this was, the highlights of our press coverage from last month. We had 44 pieces of coverage, and we've never had coverage using a PR firm. So we have spent some money on a PR firm, I'll talk more about that, but we haven't actually had coverage through them. So this is basically all kind of what we've done as a company in-house. So Huffington Post, Business Insider, Fortune magazine, Mashable, The Sun, and we're on Fox News. We kind of had a press release that went semi-viral last month. And our top press features in general, Fast Company, we were named the next big thing in dating by Forbes, Vice, Wired, Bustle, the Wall Street Journal. I'd say we probably had a lot of press coverage, particularly given our size. We're kind of, to put it into context, we're hundreds of thousands of users, but a smallish team really. So why is PR important for app downloads? Firstly, social proof. I think now more than ever, there are so many pulls on our attention, and social proof almost acts as a kind of filter. So, what companies should we focus on? Where should we put our attention? If you see, big media publications talking about a brand, that's a kind of signal to your brain saying, focus your attention here, it's worth it. Then branding, which ties in with the quote that I mentioned at the beginning. I guess, you can define brand in different ways, but it's essentially the character of your company and how it comes across to the public. And I think it's pretty much impossible to build a brand without PR. And then, last but not least, word of mouth. So that's really, I'm sure everyone in this room knows that, just getting people to talk about your company and your product or services. And I think probably a lot of you will know of Thursday, the dating app Thursday, who do lots of guerrilla marketing. They are very good at just getting people to talk about them. So what does a broader strategy look like? And I guess this is probably more for slightly earlier stage companies, but I guess it applies kind of later stage to some extent as well. So firstly, identify goals, and I'll talk about each of these points in more detail one by one. Second, decide whether you'll basically do your PR in-house or use an external PR agency. And then decide how to measure success, determine your target audience, and then kind of, I guess, define your strategy around campaigns, like you reaching out versus more responsive requests. So firstly, identifying goals. These, I would say, are the most common goals, probably the most relevant for the people in this room: increasing app downloads or website traffic, higher levels of brand awareness, which you can, I guess, measure through surveys, and backlinks for SEO. That's one of our key goals. So yeah, we've definitely have some learnings about in-house versus external PR firms. But one thing I would say is PR isn't always worth the time or money. It is, to really get something out of it, you do have to put a lot into it. And I think it's always relevant at a certain point in time, but like very early stage companies, like literally, when it's kind of 1-2 people, I think it's probably not worth it. There's of course that opportunity cost of time. So while I'm like a huge fan of it, I do really think there's like a time and a place for PR. Obviously, it depends on budget, goals, like the results that you're seeing, they vary massively. Timing, and as I mentioned, opportunity cost. So yeah, we have mostly done founder-led PR. So myself and my sister kind of run all of the PR within SoSynced, and that has worked very well for us. And it's kind of something I think about, as we scale and grow as a company, will I always be spending time on PR? Because, obviously changes. But I genuinely think, like, even in many years' time, that I will still be spending time on this, because I do think it's important. And particularly as a dating app, I should have mentioned that earlier, but it's really important when you're on an app finding the love of your life, that you feel safe, that you trust the brand. It kind of changes the whole experience. And yeah, I would say one of the main learnings that we've had is only try a PR firm if you can afford to experiment. If you can actually just say, right, I'm putting this money into a black hole. If we lose it, then that's okay. It's obviously never ideal, but you have to be prepared to essentially not get anything back. Because we hired a PR firm for 3 months and we didn't get any coverage, and it caused a lot of stress. It's just when we raised our funding round and we weren't getting any return on this money. So I would say that's super important, to just be prepared to lose that money. But of course, as I'm sure everyone knows, it is important to experiment with different things. So how to measure the impact of PR? I would say test as early as possible, of course, bearing in mind when it's the right timing. I think this is important because at an early stage, everything's just so much more simple. You tend to have like a baseline of organic downloads, and then you can quite easily see on the day that an article is published, you can very clearly see that spike. So before you have 7 different acquisition channels all kind of working in their own ways, I'd say try to test as early as you can. Another learning that we found is it's so important to test like-for-like articles. So if we have one line in even a big publication, we might not see that many downloads from that alone. If we have a whole feature in even a smaller publication, we might see literally 100 to 200 times the downloads that we would see from a very small feature. So it's really important to test different styles of articles. And for us, success story coverage works very, very well. If we say the number of success stories we've had, had thousands of success stories. Marriages just had a SoSynced baby, which was exciting. If we talk about that, it's kind of, you're basically showing people, what they want. and that's super, super powerful. Then, yeah, attribution software, I think I probably don't need to go into too much detail about that, but we use AppsFlyer, and most of the PR downloads we see come through as organic. You can sometimes track, talk about it at the bottom, but like web to app downloads through referral links, or you can track kind of, I guess, like a referral link to your website, and then you can see an increase in website downloads that if you kind of set up correctly through attribution software, you can track through like certain links. Yeah, and then Google Analytics for general web traffic. As I mentioned, you can often see referral links. They don't always link to your website, so that doesn't always work. But you can definitely see an increase in like people Googling your brand. So if we've had like a good week of press coverage, we might see an increase of say like 100 to 200% in a week of people Googling SoSynced or, SoSynced dating app. And you can use the Google Search Console for exact search terms like during that kind of period of press coverage. For us, it's not super relevant because SoSynced dating app is pretty clear, but of course there's companies with lots of different services, so that can be more powerful depending on your specific company. But yeah, I think this doesn't sit like super comfortably with me because, as I said, I'm like quite analytical. But you do have to accept that measuring the impact of PR, it's not perfect, and it never will be, particularly in the long term. But I would say, as like a general rule, if you're getting like fairly regular press coverage, you should be able to see a trend upwards in terms of like core organic downloads over the course of 6 months. So this isn't like spikes on the day of an article. This is kind of, a sustained increase in downloads. So how to identify your audience? Probably most companies will do the first step of this already, but you can just use profiles and kind of, I guess, characteristics of your existing customers and users, and essentially just decide what you think or which publications you think would be the best fit. And then I'd say, test different publications with similar features. That point that I was talking about, like similar styles of articles, is really important. And I would say it's really, really important to test the publications, because we had a feature in what we thought was our perfect publication for our audience early on, and it just didn't work at all. And then other publications have kind of surprised on the upside. So you think you don't really until you kind of can see the numbers. So then we have campaigns versus responsive requests. So responsive requests, they tend to happen a bit later on. I would say generally after kind of 2 years, say, when you've built a brand. I think most companies will have a press email address. They kind of come through in there. But you can also, if you want to be more proactive about it, follow journalists on Twitter. And quite a lot of them do post, the articles that they're writing about. They'll be like, oh, I'm writing about X, Y, Z. Are there any experts or are there any individuals who've had experience in this area? Then proactive campaigns. So really you need like a newsworthy press release, and obviously that's very subjective and it's very nuanced and there's no perfect formula. But it does kind of take a bit of trial and error, and these things you can't predict. One might just massively take off, and you might kind of not fully understand why. So to some extent, it's a numbers game too. But generally, it would include some stats of some kind, some ideally stats around a trend that's kind of becoming popular in the news, say, and like expert comments as well. And I would say feature releases just won't cut it for a press release unless you're really a household brand and it's a really, really big feature release.
What do you mean by feature feature releases?
Like feature release for an app, like if you're, I know for us, like our compatibility calculator, like that definitely wouldn't get coverage. Like the users love it, but it's not something that really is newsworthy. So yeah, newsflash, you aren't that interesting. And I think like we all have this kind of bias to, kind of overvalue our own story and like how interesting we are. And of course it's human nature to some extent. Like I think it's probably healthy for your self-esteem, so don't stop doing that. But just also bear in mind that like to journalists, like you as an individual aren't super interesting. And I definitely am guilty of this. Like, or in the early days, I was like, oh, I'm setting up a dating app with my sister. It's, a nice story. But actually, people weren't interested in it. So you kind of have to find, like, other angles. I think, like, one kind of thing to conceptualize is, like, how would you feel if you were reading this and you didn't know the people in the article? Like, obviously, when you get to kind of Elon Musk level, everyone is interested in him, but they're very few and far between. So yeah, this is just like a template email that I kind of use like pretty much on a daily basis. I hope you're well. I'm reaching out because of X, Y, Z. Just really want to say in that first line why you're reaching out. Someone said that a lot of journalists get one pitch every 8 seconds. So, they're not going to spend time working out why you're reaching out to them. I am XYZ. We've been featured in, this kind of comes later, and I'll talk about this, I think, in the next slide. And then if it's a pitch, just, 2 to 3 sentences is all you need. But if you're responding to an inbound request or comments, then go for it. Like sometimes, quite often I write like 2,000 words. It's like almost an entire blog post in response to a journalist, because the more you give them, the more likely they are to find what they're looking for within that kind of text. So yeah, this is what I call the social proof snowball effect. And it does take time. It genuinely takes years, like probably at least a year, if not like 2 to 3 years. But basically, as I talked about at the beginning, social proof is a way of helping people to filter where they should focus their attention. So, you get your first piece of press coverage and you say, hey, we've been featured in, like the Bristol Post. And if you happen to catch a journalist when they are short of pictures and, the timing is right, then they'll be like, oh, okay, this company has been featured in something. Potentially, I'll listen to them instead of just seeming completely random. Then you can kind of get featured in like a mid-tier publication, top-tier publication, then ideally multiple top-tier publications. When you have like big brand names, you kind of massively increase the chance of the journalist reading your email and replying. And then eventually you kind of want to go to multiple top-tier, highly relevant publications. So if you're pitching to a tech publication, TechCrunch, then you say we're featured in this great tech publication and so on. And it's kind of like climbing a ladder. And yeah, it's definitely not an overnight process, but it is super powerful. And yeah, as I mentioned, it can take literally years to secure top tier press coverage. Our first piece of kind of major coverage was in the Daily Mail. That was about a year after we launched. That was, our first so synced marriage right there. And I think, like resilience is key, and just expect to be in it for the long haul. And I think, just make that conscious decision of whether it is worth the time and money to test right now. It's also important to balance resilience and self-awareness. I think you don't want to be too pushy. And it's kind of, I even find it hard to decide where that balance lies. So, I once secured coverage after reaching out to the same journalist 7 times, but that was with 7 different pitches. And that was probably with at least a month in between. I think the number one thing you don't want to do is kind of follow up again and again and again and be like, oh, just checking you saw my email, because most of them will have seen it, but they just are super, super busy. So yeah, if you reach out multiple times, I would do it with different angles. But I was actually surprised after like that one journalist who I'd reached out to 7 times. I even said to my sister, I was like, I think I'm just going to give up on this one. Like, eventually you have to, right? They might just not be interested in like your company or your angles. And she was like, oh, try one more time. And then I did, and then got a great kind of feature from it. And yeah, you just have to accept that some journalists might not be interested in your company or your comments or your perspective, and that's okay. So I think, yeah, just like, use common sense and are on the side of not chasing too much, which is probably not like a typical kind of sales tactic, but, journalists are kind of quite sensitive about being chased. Yeah, so I think the top 2 points are really, really important. Journalists are super busy, but most are busy, not rude. So, very few will reply to your emails. Even if they feature you, they probably won't let you know. But like, I just see it as them protecting their mental health. Like, they are so bombarded with so many emails all the time and so many pulls on their attention. They have to pitch, they have to write the article, they have to chase companies for payments. Like, they're not kind of sitting on some throne, like, eating food all day. They are working really hard. So I think it's like, just important not to be like resentful about it at all, and to just be like, right, that's them doing them. That's okay if they want to respond, and it's okay if they don't. So yeah, and you probably won't get much feedback, which is kind of difficult because you don't know really, if what you're doing is wrong or if they're just busy. But it's kind of something, that you have to accept. If you're reaching out for weeks and not getting any replies, then probably do need to adjust your style or your kind of pitch. But yeah, it's kind of, that's something that isn't ideal about the process, but it's just one of those things. In the early days of SoSynced, I spent basically a week reaching out to 150 journalists. Got like one piece of coverage. I think it was in Men's Health, like this tiny weeny kind of section. And I probably wouldn't do that now for the return on time, but it was kind of what got this whole PR ball rolling. So I'm glad I did it. And so finally the tables have turned. Eventually, journalists will start reaching out to you. And I mean, it depends on the size of your company, how quickly you've grown, lots of different things. But I would say, generally that's when you're at kind of, a stage where, or probably like at least 1 to 2 years in, unless you've had a huge amount of funding up front and you've been able to kind of pay for, massive PR firms. And this is, one of the best things that I didn't really expect to happen, but eventually they will also refer you to other journalists. So they have like very tight-knit circles. So, we quite often get inbound requests where we're like, oh, this person told me that you helped them out with this article. Can you help me out with something that's, kind of relevant? And just like with all kind of relationships, building trust takes time. So the final tips, I would say like always under promise, over deliver. Like never send anything late. I've never ever sent anything late to a journalist. This is like a personal choice, but I do like press stuff when I'm on holiday because it kind of keeps that relationship going. There was like one time last September where the Wi-Fi cut out and I was like in Greece and like walked to the other village with my laptop. I was like, I need to send this on time. But it does, like, as soon as you kind of don't do something that you say you're going to do, it can, like, they have deadlines as well, right? They're not kind of just making up this deadline to force you to do something like unnecessarily. And like I tend to say, oh, I'll get this to you by 2 days' time at 5 p.m. and then probably send it like maybe even a day early, like depending on what's going on. And they always seem really grateful for that. So like pitching, short email, like 2 to 3 lines, sharing comments, long email, as I said, like I think it's probably anywhere between like 300, maybe 400 words minimum that I send to like genuinely 2,000 words sometimes. And I would also say optimize your Twitter bio. I don't really use Twitter, I don't really tweet, but I always have like relevant kind of points to press in my bio, because lots of journalists do use Twitter a lot. Yeah, so that's my How to Grow Your Downloads with PR workshop. I hope it was helpful, and yeah, happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thanks very much for the talk, really interesting. How do you go about getting the contacts? Do you use a press database, or do you research online, and what channels do journalists prefer?
Yeah, sure. So I usually use Twitter. So I tried lots of different things. I reached out on LinkedIn. I got like a few replies on LinkedIn, but Twitter has definitely been the best for us. And I basically kind of Google different dating apps, look at articles that have been written about dating apps before, or even more relationship trends, not even specifically companies, and then follow them. And quite often they will have their email in their Twitter bio. And that's, yeah, I think there are lots of databases, and I think I did try one once. I haven't really subscribed to any. And yeah, it's kind of, the Twitter stuff works for us, so we kept doing that.
You mentioned how you use PR to kind of inform additional PR, so the kind of Snowball strategy.
Yeah.
How do you go about leveraging the PR that you secure in other channels too? Do you use it kind of as social proof on social? Do you use it in performance marketing?
Yeah.
Keen to hear about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I mostly leverage it through the kind of outreach emails to journalists. I'd say that's what's been most powerful. We used to post like press coverage on their Instagram and Twitter. We didn't really see that great a response, really. I sometimes post like the bigger pieces of coverage that we get on LinkedIn, and that does really well, just like my personal LinkedIn. Everyone's just like seems supportive and excited, which is nice. And we have, in terms of like digital ads, we have tried like, being like, featured in, or like named as the next big thing in dating as Forbes. They've kind of like performed in line with our other ads. There's probably more that we could do around that. Like we tried, banners on the website to see if that makes a difference with kind of quotes from articles, and it hasn't made as much of a difference as I thought in terms of that. But we do have like a very high conversion rate of our homepage to app downloads on the website, and I think that is definitely to do with the kind of press coverage section.
Just curious, what was your most successful piece of PR, if you have like a clear winner? And similar to the previous question, what is your your most successful acquisition tool outside of PR, or is PR your most successful acquisition tool?
Yeah, so there have been 2 articles that have been really, really good for downloads, and one was the Daily Mail article, actually 3. One was the Daily Mail article that I showed on the screen. That was about our first wedding and success story, and as I mentioned, something that people who are looking for a relationship aspire to. Then we had another one in The Guardian, which wasn't so direct about our success stories. It kind of, I think, mentioned, they recently launched and they've helped 500 couples find love or something like that. It was a story where it's like about different female dating app founders, and they focused on, I think it was about 3 different companies. So we had like, say, a third of the article. But that did really well in terms of downloads. Then we had a feature in News 24, which is a very big like African publication, South African publication. And that was interesting because it like trended. So it went into, I think it was like the top 5 articles of the day. So it stayed on their homepage for a day and a half. So the article probably would have been quite typical, but because it trended, we saw a lot of downloads from that. Cool, I think that's everything then. Well, yeah, thank you so much for listening. Hope to catch up with somebody later.